All right, I'll go. But I'll be fashionably late. No, yes, no, yes. No, yes!
Greetings and welcome back. This is Grinding Gear. I'm Garrett, here as always with Kyle. And today we're going to be talking about how jobs in Final Fantasy XIV have, kind of challenged our expectations of how classes can function in an MMO and why we think Final Fantasy XIV's job system is possibly one of its key defining characteristics. I've got some personal thoughts, Kyle.
Oh?
We're still progressing through Heavensward, so at the time of recording this, we're still pretty early on in our journey through Final Fantasy XIV. All through A Realm Reborn, I stuck with Summoner. But now, at the beginning of Heavensward, I picked up the Dark Knight job, and I have not swapped back since. I know you've been on a bit of a journey yourself, but I've swapped once, and it has kind of stuck. Coming into Final Fantasy, I would say as a WoW player, but really this is true of every MMO I've enjoyed. It's true of the Old Republic. It's true of Guild Wars. They all kind of fall into this. A lot of my sense of in-game identity when it comes to MMOs has come from the class I'm playing. I mean, hell, dude, even when we were playing Valheim, I stuck to a bow so much. I very much thought of myself as an archer in that game, and that game straight up doesn't have classes. So the first thing I did when you successfully convinced me to finally try this game was I ran to Google and I typed in Final Fantasy XIV classes. And I probably spent a good couple of hours reading up on what, I then learned were called jobs. And I was talking to you about this. I was talking to our buddy John about this, and I had heard from you and other people that just don't worry about it too much. Don't get hung up on what class or what job you're going to play. But again, I feel like I've been hardwired by other online games to see myself in game as my class. So while it was probably the wrong way to think about it, I think having a heading and thinking to myself, I'm going to be a summoner, I think it helped me with my initial journey into this game. But in the early stages of swapping over to Dark Knight, getting invested in another job, I started thinking that the flexibility was going to hurt my investment in my in-game character. But now that I've spent a solid number of hours with another job, I feel like I finally understand the freedom and the flexibility of FF14's job system. And I think I have rested on it doesn't kill my sense of character or my attachment to my in-game character. And it's been a really interesting, mental journey for me that I find kind of fascinating because it really goes against everything I thought I understood or believed classes needed to be in MMOs.
Headcanon, immersion, these aren't unknown things in just RPGs in general. A lot of MMOs require that you bring something else to the table, and that's a very powerful tool. I mean, Diablo 2, the fact that you play as a druid or a sorcerer, it doesn't really kind of play into that in the story, so you end up just kind of adding a little bit in the background. And World of Warcraft is extremely good at that. You combine a dwarf and a warrior, you've got yourself a little bit of a background you've made up with that character, and that investment can help you propel through the generalized story that is World of Warcraft's adventure. And when you go make an alt, that uniqueness gives you that motivation, that energy to see them through maybe the same story again. Now, of course, there's factions, there's lots of zones. Final Fantasy, though, makes you the main character of an extremely detailed story. One that is very deep and rich and plays more like a traditional RPG as we know them now today. Around level 20, I realized there were no talents. There was very little customization that I was giving my character at all outside of my original racial choice in my starting job, which I was required to play until a certain level before I could change it up if I wanted. I found myself not missing those things, and it was an extreme moment in my head. Talents, poring over optimization guides, were something I felt was essential to an MMO before I started playing Final Fantasy XIV.
Yeah, you and I were talking about this, I think off stream. We're streaming now, by the way. Join us on Mondays, right here on YouTube. You had mentioned the talent thing, and Kyle, I want you to know that it wasn't until that conversation about 3 days ago that I realized I hadn't messed with talents in Final Fantasy XIV, because it just at no point had it even crossed my mind.
And that's something that World of Warcraft does really well. There's a lot of customization. Because of that, there can be a lot of balance issues, and it's a give and take. Both systems kind of work on their own, but Final Fantasy's job system isn't as jarring as you think. When you think of your World of Warcraft character and your headcanon, the idea of them changing so drastically as to become a different class seems extremely foreign, something that might even ruin your interest in that character. But recently, hitting Heavensward with the Dark Knight and the Astrologian, we found that it doesn't. It just kind of bakes into the greater journey.
This whole thing comes about as I'm very surprised that I love my character as much as I do. And there was this, it even comes, I keep realizing this, that I think it is successful through various different means. Like, another personal thing that happened was, I learned how to change my character's appearance. You get an item in game that lets you do that. And at a certain point in A Realm Reborn, they just give you one. Here you go. If you'd like to mulligan how you made your character, go for it. You run around, you see all kinds of cool people. Like, I started with a human because I don't know. I was like, I usually play elves. I don't want to play an elf, but there's a lot of cool elves in this game, Kyle. Thought definitely occurred to me that once I can recustomize my character, maybe I'll swap to an elf. But I got to a point where I'm like, no, this is my character. This is No Crust. I like No Crust. This is what No Crust looks like. I'm attached, and it doesn't matter that one day or 1 minute I might be slinging spells or unable to see because there's too many awesome things being summoned on my screen, and the next I'm swinging a giant sword and tanking. It's still my character. It's still me, and my character just wears different hats, has different affinities, and it was a cool realization to come to. So let's talk about it. We're mostly gonna, as you and I, our history comes from World of Warcraft. Now we're playing Final Fantasy XIV. Those are the two games we're mostly gonna check in on and reference with this discussion. But let's talk about what Final Fantasy XIV I think does right, and what you think does right, with the way it handles jobs, with the way it handles classes. Essentially, if we're gonna borrow terms from other MMOs.
Final Fantasy XIV has the main story quest, which is going to lead you through the journey and ultimately supply you with the bulk of your XP experience that's sustaining your character, leveling them up. So by starting with one of these base jobs and evolving into another job or class, you get a sense of the world very early on, and you get a simplified version to enter that sphere into. You also create an area of long sustainability. When other jobs come out, when new things pique your interest, if balance strikes your character, they're not lost. You don't have to necessarily give up all the progress that you've made on that character. You could simply switch jobs and continue to be the same person with all your investments, all of your reputations and currencies that you had along the way.
It's fascinating because I hadn't really thought about it that way, but I guess I was over in World of Warcraft, I was historically the type of player that would just stick with my class come hell or high water. Didn't matter how many times they nipped Paladin in the bud or anything like that. I just kind of stuck with it. But what I find more interesting is, I think what you started to touch on there, which is things I unlock. I don't need to go swap to an alt that I grinded out quality of life improvements on my main to enjoy, right? I just have whatever I've unlocked that is a quality of life improvement or a power gain on my main, and it's still my main. So if I go from Dark Knight back to Summoner because for whatever reason, it's pretty and I want to play Summoner again, I'm good to go. I can still go. I still have mount speed or flight unlocked in whatever zones I've gotten that in on. I still have all of my glamours and my pets and all of this stuff. And some of that is shared in a game like World of Warcraft, but some of it isn't. And you need to unlock it on your main before you can go have an easier time on an alt. And that's a cool thing that I 100% did not think of or understand when I started playing this game.
There were barriers I expected along that way too, such as the first time I changed classes, I mounted up. Oh, I'm allowed to mount. Well, that's pretty exciting. And then I flew. I flew as a level 3 rogue across the land because that progress that I had made and those unlocks were already a part of this alt class. In addition to that, there's a buff when you're playing a job that is lower level than perhaps your main or the one you've taken the furthest. So in that way, heirlooms are baked in to your off jobs to get them to the same level as your main.
I'm not even sure. I think they nerfed heirlooms. I don't think they even work the same way that they used to. But yeah, that idea of having this boost, right, is kind of already built in. It's just there if you're playing some catch up. Gosh, yeah, I felt real dumb because I did not understand like the whole leveling individual jobs. And then one day I was swapping between Summoner and it wasn't Dark Knight. I was messing around with Samurai for a hot second. And I was like, oh, every job just has its own XP bar. I'm like currently, I think 64 Dark Knight. Like I'm like my character No Crust is not level 64. It's level 64 Dark Knight. I haven't touched Summoner in a while, so he's level 58 Summoner. Like, and it took me so long to realize that that's kind of how it functioned. That each had its own XP bar and level associated with the job. But let's check in with World of Warcraft. Yeah, I don't think it's inherently devoid of positive game systems. I think there is still something to the way that they do classes. There's been a lot of conversation about, I think, your personal identity in World of Warcraft fairly recently, because too they're having more cross-faction interplay with players with the Horde and Alliance stuff has kind of brought that conversation to the forefront again. But it still just brings my head back to like World of Warcraft's height. Like think of Burning Crusade, Wrath of the Lich King era World of Warcraft, where it felt like everyone was playing it. You and I were I don't know if lucky enough, but we were of the perfect age. We were in college, kind of during World of Warcraft's peak. You just walk around campus and there'd be like a little pin on someone's backpack or their jacket, and you're like, oh, you play Warlock.
It was a cultural explosion. I remember trading pins in line at GameStop to get Wrath of the Lich King at midnight on release. It was just what you played. It was a team sport. Some people had a match that night. You had raid. It wasn't that different. Having unique characters that you create with a class and a racial identity that you've combined to create your immersion and headcanon is a very powerful tool, and the game lends itself to that because of all the zones and just factions. When you play a Warlock Undead versus a Warlock Human, you're going to have an extremely different story experience, and that lends itself to alts. You are not going to sign yourself up to play through the exact same story again. World of Warcraft is full of choices. And that is a huge strength of the game. There are choices as to where you're going to level, how you're going to progress this character, what zones you might avoid, what quests you want to avoid this time around, what professions you're going to bake in that are ultimately going to change your journey because those professions can supply you with character power. The talent point system on top of that, all that means that a alt is a wholly unique thing. And when we look at Final Fantasy, for instance, there's one main story quest there.
Yeah, it's as I was working through my thoughts on this, it's interesting how much the story they're trying to tell, I think, kind of affects both. I think it's more true for the earlier stages of World of Warcraft. Like you said, the starting zones, like there's so many like layers of choice just in getting started in a while, right? Like choose your faction, choose your race, choose your class. And then you're going to have a very different starting experience based on the race choice, for example. And so there's so many teams, right? What team are you on? What faction are you on? What class are you on? What race are you on? And it's, at least for what we think of as vanilla World of Warcraft, or like this kind of the starting experience before you start hitting expansion content, it really affects your leveling experience. That's not so true once you get to expansions and everyone's just questing through the same zone. There might be a faction divide, but there's not much of a racial divide based on the in-game races.
We haven't even mentioned specs. Like each class here can be wholly unique from each other based on which of the 3, 4, or 2 specs that you're going to invest in. I mean, when we compare Final Fantasy 14 jobs, which are, there's 19, and Blue Mage is its own thing, you've got 36 WoW specializations to choose from. And that choice you make, again, early on in your character is going to greatly impact the way you play that adventure. And for me, coming from, vanilla and BC, I quested as a holy priest, which was absolute murder. It was a horrible experience, but anytime I got to a dungeon, it meant I was ready to heal. I was ready to go. And that laborious effort rewarded me during that time period with the ability to get queues like nobody else, to have this very real server identity as that pug troll guy who's always ready to go.
It's an interesting thought, right? Like, you mentioned the different talents and the specs within a class in World of Warcraft is something that, when compared to Final Fantasy XIV, makes it really unique, because we don't have that in Final Fantasy. But I don't know. It's another one of these things where I look at them like, I think both work. Both can work. I think it's cool that in Final Fantasy XIV, if I'm playing a summoner, I'm playing a summoner. And if I see another one and I see them do something cool that I haven't seen before, I can talk to them about it. And I know that either I didn't know it was there or I'm going to get there eventually. That we're all kind of speaking the same language when it comes to a class. But that isn't to say that the opposite isn't cool in World of Warcraft. It's kind of neat if there's, 2 paladins hanging out. It's like, nice big sword. Are you a ret? Yeah, I'm doing damage. How do you like? Oh no, I'm tank for life, man. And that's an interesting bit. And of course those lines have gotten blurry with multi-spec, which has been in World of Warcraft for a really long time now. So suffice to say, I think we're both quite smitten by Final Fantasy XIV at this point. But is there anything you would say that the way they handle jobs could be improved?
The biggest trouble is that once you've gone through the main story quest and its grand riches of XP, you are reduced to more of a grind. You've got fates, which are kind of like daily quests, zone events that you could get up to. There are tons of side quests you can do that don't currently in the low levels supply a lot of XP. There are dungeons that you could run, but you have to get to level 16 before you can join those. There are alternate leveling methods, but again, those are often tied to getting to a certain level to join them. So the very early levels are not so different than World of Warcraft. You're going to be grinding, and you're going to hit XP walls that can be frustrating to go through. And without that energy, that headcanon of having the new race with the new job, with the new spec that you're trying out that's different, because you've done a Dwarven protection warrior, but have you leveled as a Dwarven arms warrior? That sort of thing can give you that oomph to progress that Final Fantasy frankly lacks.
At least for like the intro levels, right?
Once the ball's rolling and you're doing dungeons and all that, like XP's really piling on those bonuses you have through your kind of passive heirlooms, your server buff you might have, item buffs you got from pre-ordering expansions. All that can get you very, very quickly caught up.
Yeah, this is the one that I'm anxious to kind of experience in the future, because I've only leveled a few jobs. And the big one I recently swapped to is tank. So I'm getting like additional bonuses pretty often, because it's especially if I'm, running dungeons, which I love doing. I'm so happy to be happy about running dungeons again. Really, really am. It's interesting. I could see it getting a bit grindy, kind of in the way a new leveling system is in World of Warcraft, like the newer Threads of Fate, like option to go do that instead of doing quests again. It's kind of tedious. Like, I'm curious what's going to happen on my like 7th or 8th job when I'm out of MSQ and I just got to go find things to grind.
And I do think that grind is a essential part of MMO. You don't come to MMO town and complain about grinding. That's what we're here to do. It's the chill aspect of spacing out, getting more power, pressing higher numbers. Yeah. That is a core game philosophy.
I love grinding. It's part of what makes these games relaxing. Like you said, it's part of the kind of zen, zoning out, meditative experience of playing an MMO, and it's part of why I really like it. And I've always had a game like this in my life, even before I got into MMOs. It's a big reason I liked The Sims back in the day, or any city builder. Yeah, Roller Coaster Tycoon was a big one.
Final Fantasy's classes are also deceptively simple. There is a global cooldown system, which means abilities can't be stacked and you have to wait in between using certain abilities. And early on, these levelings of, I've now done a rogue and a marauder, are dull. And there's not a lot of exciting buttons to press, nor is each level offering me a new chance to crit or any sort of those old talent systems that you may know coming from classic WoW at this time. The complexity of a Final Fantasy rotation and job is really tied to balancing on cooldown and off cooldown abilities and weaving those in, which doesn't come till later levels. In that way, I think Final Fantasy's jobs don't put their best foot forward. They're just not as, well, they're certainly flashy, but they're not as exciting and diverse as WoW classes can feel when you first get into them.
It's funny. I'm the other way around. I've been more overwhelmed by classes in Final Fantasy than I am underwhelmed. This is like too many buttons all at once. Like we go back, a few episodes ago, we talked about how we both tried Red Mage. I also tried Samurai. And it was just this splash of buttons all over my action bar, and I had no idea where to start.
Which is very, very intense. Luckily, there's things like Palace of the Dead that can go divide those up for you. I'm more talking about those early A Realm Reborn kind of classes like that Rogue and that Marauder I've played through, where you start at level 1. There are absolutely those classes like Red Mage starts you and just dumps abilities on your bar.
It was a lot. And yeah, one of my favorite tips we got was to, hey, go to Palace of the Dead when you get a class like that. You're not sure, because it'll start you at level 1 and you'll slowly be able to use more and more abilities.
And in that way, World of Warcraft's heroic classes do piecemeal those out naturally to you. And there's even sort of starting tutorials when you do a boost that'll help you get acquainted. It
was something that I felt Dark Knight did quite well. I don't know if Astrologian was a similar experience for you, but it didn't overwhelm me. And here I am, I don't know, probably 20 hours in, I just got a new bar, like a whole new resource with I think it's the blood bar. I literally just got it yesterday. I haven't dove too far into it, but I've been playing this class quite a bit. And they just I feel like if MSQ quest lists or anything to go by, I'm about halfway through Heaven's Ward. It's like, here's a new resource now that you've kind of got your bearings. Like the way it's been dishing things out for Dark Knight is much more the speed I'm comfortable with compared to what I experienced with Samurai and Red Mage. So we kind of hinted at it already, talking about maybe what we don't love so much about what World of Warcraft does. Repeating main story quests. Good God, Kyle, the amount of times I've been to Honor Hold or whatever the hell the Horde equivalent is in Burning Crusade.
Having to witness those same, in-game dialogue bubbles again, having to unlock your mount again, having to grind the many types of currencies to even access areas again is tedious. While we've highlighted just how strong the player identity can be when you mix all these customizable things, that lack of cross-account connection is really hurting World of Warcraft at this stage.
Yeah, this again could be like its own discussion, but there's been a lot of talk about World of Warcraft feeling like you have to be in there every day because they've added so many systems to the game that require grinding, be it reputation, currency, both, or multiples of both at the same time, which is a lot of what's going on, in things like Shadowlands and has been going on in BFA and rolling back. And it's just, to me, it's always hurt the alt friendliness of it. To me, World of Warcraft used to be a game where I had a lot of alts. I would have what I would refer to as like my toon garage. It's like, all right, what am I taking out today? Am I feeling like paladin? Am I feeling like warrior? Am I feeling like hunter? Am I feeling like priest? And the more modern expansions, kind of from Legion forward, really, I guess Draenor forward, I haven't done it because I can't keep up. I go to my alts and it feels like I'm slow, underpowered, and it takes forever to do things because they're not caught up to where my main is with whatever it is that we're grinding. And garrison, artifact, weapon, what was it in BFA? I don't remember. That expansion is
necklace,
the stupid necklace thing that everybody hated. And now in Shadowlands, it's been like your covenant, for example, which they're finally going to be really doing some upheaval to. But they're these things that just make the game feel very unfriendly to me. Whereas when it was simpler and there were less systems and maybe grindier, because all I was doing all day was like running dungeons or PvPing, I personally found that more enjoyable. Because I was like, cool, I want a new experience. I'll just go roll a different class. And that'll change up my experience.
The customization and the way you get power through talent selection, professions, covenants, is something that World of Warcraft is doing wrong. There is optimization now in the age of the internet, and that creativity is ultimately lost. Something that Final Fantasy does really well is just having a complicated class that you just need to get good at. Like so many games, it is going to present you with a challenge that you must just overcome and be skilled at it enough to perform. All these different powers spread through so many different avenues of veiled customization mean that you're extremely vulnerable to balance. And that investment you put in over years could be lost. And you might find yourself needing to supply your raid with another spec or even another class entirely.
It's a lot of potential investment to lose.
And I think that's why we see so much passion for these racial combinations with the classes. But in the end, I have to ask, is it really that immersive breaking if a gnome were to transform into a cat? At this stage of things, why in lore are the druids holding back that information from gnomes? Having now experienced a Lalafell do several flips and slam down a great axe, I can't say that my day was ruined.
I would argue that it was improved.
And if we're thinking about, feeling special as a hero, there are excellent lore reasons for the Draenei to never invest in warlock powers. But I'm a special hero after all. I could probably handle it. And are those artificial divides now limiting World of Warcraft's ability to grow and let us be the heroes we want to be?
That's a good way to put it. You've made me think of tabletop a lot today. And how I would prefer bending the rules in a lot of tabletop RPG scenarios. Just like, oh, this race would never be that. Well, why? I can come up with reasons. Like, I know headcanon has some negative connotations, but I think it can also be helpful. In a world where tabletop is so popular right now, too, as I find it interesting, the pushback against more customization and more freedom. So we've been dancing around it, but I think a big overarching thing that kind of highlights the differences between jobs and classes and how they're handled in Final Fantasy XIV versus World of Warcraft is how story and lore of the two games fit in. And in Final Fantasy XIV, as you've said, we're the main character. We are the main hero. We are the heroes of the story that's rolling out to a really high level. We're really elevated. We're doing some truly fantastical, heroic things as we play through. Well, the Warcraft, on the other hand, has kind of gone through a transformation. Back in vanilla, we were essentially like one of many. We were like a soldier or an adventurer, and we were just kind of fighting alongside these names and faces that we knew from Warcraft 3, or that were the stars of the quests and the raids that we were completing, right? But over the years, they've made us more of like a central figure, but I think in a way that's like a half measure. I think if they're going to go that route, and they have been going that route, I don't think they have gone far enough. Because they're making us more central, but we don't show up in the cool cinematics because they're pre-rendered and there's no way to get our heroes in there. We're still picking up the pieces after the main characters get to do the cool thing, be it Thrall, Jaina, Sylvanas, whoever. It's Final Fantasy XIV takes the latter, I think, World of Warcraft strategy. Not saying they coined it by any means, but if we look at how World of Warcraft has shifted the focus on you, the player character, Final Fantasy XIV takes that and just runs with it and pushes it as far as it can go to make us the center of the story. Whereas World of Warcraft is still dancing around it. Again, it's throughout so much of this talk, I don't inherently prefer one or the other. I think there's cool sides to both. But with World of Warcraft, I think I liked it better when I was less important in the story. I think I preferred being just another elf, just another orc. amongst the Alliance or the Horde.
Something I think World of Warcraft would really benefit from is class quests again. And if I'm going to be this example of what a mage is, that personal story could really add to the grander tale that I'm becoming a soldier in.
That's fair. I mean, Legion is when I remove my Arthas fanboy, Legion is my favorite World of Warcraft expansion. I think it was pretty exceptional and really was firing on all cylinders. And I think the Order Hall campaigns, which were essentially class quest lines, they did a lot for personal investment.
And you can carry that energy over. So in Final Fantasy, when I throw a dagger on my rogue quest line, but then I do a main story quest where I don't have my daggers out, I can kind of mix the two. And I create this dialogue with the game that is very much my own story.
In Final Fantasy, it's just my character. When I switch jobs, it's just my character has learned a new skill. And that level that's assigned to that job is indicative of how much time and how proficient my character is in that role. And it just took me a while to kind of wrap my head around that. I had to jump jobs a few times and really settle into a second job for a good amount of time, because I messed around with Red Mage. I messed around with Samurai, but I think I'm approaching in Dark Knight about as much time as I've put into Summoner. And it's finally clicking for me. Everyone's going to love me. I like both. I like how both games handle classes.
I think there are a lot of people who are on the fence about trying Final Fantasy XIV because they're afraid that those headcanon moments, their immersion and their customization won't be rewarded. You have to look at it as a different game. And those sort of things you're looking for here do exist. But your optimizations in gameplay, rotation, figuring out the on cooldown and off cooldown system, not what websites you read about your talents on and what information you brought from outside the game.
Yeah, I think you can still shop though. Like, hey, what's the next job I'm going to go pick up? You can read about rotation optimizations and the various resources that whatever job you're interested in may have and how they function. Like, that's really cool. But if you're watching this and you're on the fence, like, should I try Final Fantasy XIV? The job system sounds weird to me. I think you can go about it one of two ways. Like, you could totally do what I did, and like you would with another MMO, go class shopping. What interests you? Focus in on that and go for it, just to get your feet wet, to have a framework to kind of limit yourself so you can just get to know the game and the game systems.
In the comments below, kind of tell us your story if you came from World of Warcraft to Final Fantasy, how your characters were different, what you like about both systems. Is there something you miss about World of Warcraft that you wish Final Fantasy had? I appreciate you joining us in a positive conversation about this.
I've been so stoked to see returning subscribers, like that number go up in how many people are watching. But there's still a lot of you that are watching that aren't subscribed. So please like and subscribe, ring that notification bell. We upload every Wednesday morning, and we are now streaming on this YouTube channel every Monday afternoon at 2 p.m. Eastern time. You can join Kyle and myself as we get up to various things. Lately, we've been working our way through hard modes. And Kyle, did you know that hard modes aren't actually hard, but they're like more sequels to dungeons, or that dungeon part 2?
Surely not.
Yeah, they're not actually hard, unless they are, which some of them are. Anyways, get in touch with us personally. My Twitter is Garrett Art. His is Kyle Ferguson. And until the next one of these next Wednesday morning, good luck and have fun, everybody.
That's and I just appear in the dome.
Wait, why are you? I didn't realize why you were laughing, and then I loaded in.
Let me just go get the quest.